Hiya folks, it's me again. I keep meaning to do a review of this book which somebody on this channel recommended to me, and I read it and I liked it. I want to do a review of it, but that's going to take some time and things keep coming up. I had a great idea for this movie that my friend Piruz wants me to write, and I spent all morning writing it, and then right when I finished that, this friend of mine sent me an ad for this talk by Stephen Batchelor that's coming up in a couple of weeks in Los Angeles, and I'd like to read a little bit of it to you. Okay, there's the ad. It's called The Art of Solitude, an Evening with Stephen Batchelor. And it costs between $55 and $200 to go, so you pay $55 for regular seating and $200 for the luxury, what are they calling it, priority seating. Look at that. Boy. Join us for a special evening with renowned Buddhist teacher Stephen Batchelor and hear about his journey to becoming a secular Buddhist. He will be sharing from his newest book, The Art of Solitude, which will be released February 18th, 2020, so I guess it's out now. When Stephen turned 60, he took a sabbatical from his teaching and turned his attention to solitude, a practice integral to the meditative traditions he has long studied and taught. He aimed to venture more deeply into solitude, discovering its full extent and depth. Okay, so far so good. The Art of Solitude documents Stephen's experiences appreciating and making art, drinking peyote and ayahuasca, practicing meditation and participating in retreats and training himself to keep an open, questioning mind, have all contributed to Batchelor's ability to be simultaneously alone and at ease. I think that's weird grammar, but, whatever. Mixed in with his personal narrative, blah-de-da-de-da, and hyper-connected world, and open-hearted, and human life, and 10 years in Asia, 35 years, and Dharma, and his wife, Martine, and blah, blah, blah. So I guess I'm going to have to burn my Stephen Batchelor books. Hold on here No, I'm not really going to burn it. Besides, this one is signed by the man himself. Right there. To Brad. Stephen Batchelor. In 2015. And Stephen Batchelor gave a nice blurb to my book, Sit Down and Shut Up. Brad Warner, oh god, it's all messed up. Brad Warner resuscitates the words of Dogen Zenji in a playful, provocative prose. Anyway, fresh, edgy, and insightful, that's what he says. I met Stephen Batchelor that one time when he signed my book, and I've had a bit of email correspondence with him. At one point, a few years ago, we were going to do a joint project, not a joint project, in England, but the scheduling couldn't work out, so it didn't happen. There's a little bit of a relationship, I suppose, of some sort that I have with the guy, but not much. But I always liked his books. His books were always really good. And even though he calls himself a Buddhist atheist, and then I will put out a book that said I believe in God, sometimes I feel like his version of atheism and my version of believing in God are kind of the same thing, So you'd have to read both of our books, I suppose, to understand that, or maybe you still wouldn't understand that if you read them. But this stuff about him getting into ayahuasca and peyote, oh my God. What happens to people? What's happened to the entire Western spirituality or Western version of Eastern spirituality in general? I have no idea. He talks about turning 60. I'm about to turn 56. Look at how good I look for 56. Isn't it amazing? But that's true. In a couple weeks or a week or something, on March 5th, I turn 56. So you can send me a present if you want. But, so I'm younger than him, but not that much younger. Not so much younger that it's like a big generation gap sort of thing, even though if you sat us side by side, you'd think we were probably 20 years apart. We aren't. We're probably more like 10 or maybe less than 10 years apart. But it's just such a different way of looking at things, maybe. I have talked here extensively about my feelings about drugs. I've even admitted, I think I did this on the YouTube page, but maybe I did it on the blog, that a few years ago, because I suffer from intense headaches a lot of the time, I live in the state of California, and I got myself a medical marijuana prescription to see if the medical marijuana, either edibles or smoking, might help with my headaches. And what I discovered is that I'm high, but with a headache, which is Sometimes slightly better, but it doesn't really relieve my headaches. But I also owned up to the fact that ever since I started smoking a little bit of it again, however many years ago, I kind of like it, and I smoke a bit of weed the way a normal person might have a glass of wine with dinner or a nightcap or something, which means I'm not a heavy user, but I've got some around the house that I sometimes indulge in. But I feel like if anything, that's a spiritual failing. That is a Buddhist failing for me. And that I was probably better off in Buddhist terms when I was totally straight. Because for the time that I studied with Nishijima Roshi and with Tim McCarthy, I would say I was probably completely straight as an arrow. Like I never had this big break with drugs the way like Noah Levine writes about, where he's bashing his head against the wall in a prison cell or whatever it was, coming to that bottoming out thing and then realizing he needed to get rid of all the drugs. Drugs were never a big part of my thing. I never indulged in them in any great extent. Although I have talked about this on the channel that I did LSD several times when I was I think it was 19 when I did it. It was that year. And I took it 4 times that year, and the 4th time was such a huge nightmare that I'm just... I don't think you could get me to take a psychedelic drug for love or money anymore. I don't know. Who knows what the future brings, but I can't even imagine, trying to do a dose, like a trippy dose of any psychedelic drug anymore. But my feelings about drug-based spirituality, let's see if I can put them once again into words, is that for one thing, if you're going to try to claim Buddhism as your spiritual path, then you can't justify the drugs at all. There's just no freaking way. Because Buddhism is, right from the outset, right from the get-go, a path of without drugs. You don't do mind-altering substances, and this is all through all of the literature. So anybody who claims they're going to be a Buddhist who does drugs, no. And again, let me try to clarify. In Japan, for example, it's pretty common for Buddhist masters to occasionally drink beer or sake, and they probably shouldn't do that. They should probably be completely straight, as should I. But that's not the kind of use I'm talking about. I'm talking about the use of drugs as a substance to somehow enhance spirituality. That's what I'm talking about, and that's what Buddhism completely forbids. So if you're going to try to be a Buddhist and claim that you're doing ayahuasca for the spiritual benefits, well, you're not a Buddhist. But I don't think Stephen Batchelor is even claiming to be a Buddhist anymore. I think he gave that up a long time ago. In fact, the most recent book, this one I got signed, is called After Buddhism. So, and I still haven't finished it. I got it in 2015 and I still haven't finished it. That's as far as I got. So Stephen Batchelor, as far as I can tell, is not claiming Buddhism as his excuse for taking ayahuasca and peyote trips. So, okay, we can give him that. Now, I am well aware, as everybody in the comments section likes to point out, as if they think I wouldn't know this, that there are all sorts of cultures, indigenous cultures, which just means people who live in an area. Indigenous is such a meaningless word. I hate the way people use it these days. But anyway, there's all sorts of indigenous cultures that have peyote use or ayahuasca use as part of their spiritual path. But the thing of that is, it's part of the entire culture. We're not talking about sort of contemporary Western people with their TVs and their internet access and their smartphones and their McDonald's and movies every week and everything else, all this stuff going on, and they do the peyote. I mean, maybe it happens in with some people still today, but that's not where that sort of spiritual path comes from. It comes from a whole different type of society. And I am a huge skeptic when it comes to imagining that somebody who comes from our contemporary sort of Western, highly materialistic society, steeped in that, is going to pop something in their mouth and then have a spiritual awakening because of it. I do not believe that ever happens. On the other hand, I will reluctantly admit that maybe at the time that LSD made its way into Western culture in the 60s, there was probably some justification for believing that it's kind of knocked people's heads in such a way to kind of get them out of this super materialistic paradigm and looking elsewhere. I think that might have happened. But the smart people were the people like Ram Dass who said, okay, tried it, did it, let's do another thing. Even Alan Watts has a similar story, tried it, did it, and said, okay, that's all I need of that. Somebody who's been through the sort of spiritual path for as long as Stephen Batchelor has, and done meditation and been serious about it, turning to ayahuasca and peyote now, late in life, just makes me feel like, oh my God, here's somebody who's just given up. And maybe the disappointments he had with his various teachers and the letdowns he had with the traditions that he tried to study with have just kind of pushed him in this direction, and he's been like, oh hell, whatever, take some peyote, trip out, have those experiences that way. I can't imagine. I'm not interested in reading his new book in which he discusses this, because I'd much rather watch Up in Smoke or some other Cheech and Chong movie if I want to see people talk about their drug experiences. At least Cheech and Chong are funny with it. I'm sure Stephen Batchelor is going to be all pretentious and with it, and I'm just not interested in that. There's also this area I've talked about here of responsibility. If you're going to do that stuff on your own, fine. If you're going to tell other people, hey, I did this and I had a great experience, well, I'm sorry, to me, that is an ethical failing, because you don't know who's out there in your audience listening to you, and you don't know where they're going to take that information. And of course, that applies to anything, you could say, but especially when it comes to drugs, because, some people's lives get really, really ruined with those things, and they're looking for any excuse from anybody they can find to start doing it again. And you don't want to be that guy who gave the person the excuse to start indulging again because they think it's spiritual now. But do I believe people can have spiritual experiences, genuine spiritual experiences, as the result of doing drugs? Well, maybe. But I also believe people can have a genuine spiritual experience as the result of a car crash or as the result of a traumatic brain injury. There was a guy I read about. I wish I could remember who this guy was. Maybe somebody can tell me in the comments. It was a story of an Englishman, and it was in World War II, and he's just in whatever town he's in, and he sees a bomb, a Nazi bomb falling, and he's just going, well, this is it. He's too close to it to get away from it, so he's figured his life is over now. And he watches this bomb fall, and it hits the ground, and it's a dud. It doesn't explode. Nothing happens. And he had this profound spiritual awakening and ended up traveling, I think, to India or maybe Japan and discovered Buddhism and started meditating as a result of this traumatic experience. So I think these drugs and things can induce a kind of trauma that forces a person to confront their stuff. And maybe for some people that's the catalyst they need to get into practice, but I think it's as bad of a catalyst to deliberately court as it would be to, go to a war zone and hope that a dud bomb falls in front of you, or to crash your car and hope that you're going to have a spiritual experience, or to hit yourself on the head with a hammer and hope you're going to have a spiritual experience. It's a crapshoot. You might have a spiritual experience from it, or you might just really F yourself up bad. and I don't want to encourage anybody to do it. So I just wanted to make this short video saying that I am deeply, deeply depressed and disappointed to hear about this change in Stephen Batchelor, a person who I used to think was pretty good. I put a thing on Twitter saying, well, at least he used to be good, and most of us don't even used to be good, you know. So you got a few books of his that he wrote before this current one that are probably still valuable to people, but I wouldn't pay for this current one. In fact, my friend was offering me a free ticket to go see him talk, and I just thought, no, that would just be depressing as hell, so I don't want to go through it. So there you go. That's my opinion. If you want to contribute to me via PayPal and Patreon, the links are below. My taxes are on their way to being done. I gave in my tax guy yesterday, and as I said, you are my main source of income these days, folks out there in internet land. So I appreciate what you do for me, and I hope to see you again. Maybe I will get to that Galileo's error review in my next video. Let's hope I manage to go for it, and we'll see you later. Bye.